Once upon a time, two boys grew up playing hockey in the village of Terrace, British Columbia. One of them went on to play in the National Hockey League. The other became a comedian. Now, one flies planes and coaches youth hockey. The other is still a comedian and owns newsstands. This is their podcast, Enjoying Orange Slices with Jeff and Ian.
It's the Stanley Cup playoffs. My name is Ian Begg. His name is Jeff Sharples. One of us goes to the games. The other one stays at home and cries like a baby. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good. What's up, Lord Begg?
Just did some shows last night. I did a Monday show last night. So it's got me a little off. But it was packed. It's like, wow, on a Monday.
You're the hardest working man. You're the James Brown of the comedy industry now. You're working. Are you Mike Reno and Loverboy working for the weekend?
No, I'm the Mary Tyler Moore of Long Beach.
That's awesome.
Mr. Grant.
That's right. You're gonna have to go into Mr. Grant's office. What's going on? Where were you last night?
I was at the Improv on Melrose.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You want to tell everybody? We tell that story every time, right? You and I going in there. The two times we've gone in together.
The funny part is, I say Mary Tyler Moore, and boom, I bring up the Improv, and who do we meet when we were there one night? Dick Van Dyke. Yeah. Dick Van Dyke sitting in the crowd, 90 years old. You would have thought he was 75.
Yeah, he looked good. He had a great bass too. He had a great bass, and
just
then
a big smile.
Yeah, he didn't care. Hey, and you remember the car he had out front? It's like a 57. It's like a throwback, beautiful Buick or Cadillac. It was awesome. Yeah, and of course, nobody was parked within city block of them. They had it all coned off. It's pretty cool.
I know both of us were hoping he had the chim car outside, but now he had a great car outside. But and then the other time was Rodney Dangerfield. That's who you met there. But last night, who they meet there at the Improv? Just old Ian Bagg. That's who they it was a lot of fun.
Baggsy. What's funny is when we bring names up like this. So we got Kalen, got my nephew. He's listening a little bit here from time to time. He's like, you guys are always dropping names. Like he's giving it to me, name dropper. Ian's a storyteller, and I'm like, I'm trying to just kind of give you the little, the lead in, the acknowledgements.
I called name droppers.
I know he's like, you guys are name droppers. I think he was more chirping me than you, and I'm like, well, we're trying to tell stories on here that'll actually keep some people interested in listening. So, I'm sure I'll get a text later today or tomorrow. Van Dyke and Rodney Dangerfield.
Is he saying that Lawrence Stella and Trevor Henry aren't pulling the numbers in? Dropping those names.
Trev, when he hears that, both of us will get a text on that one.
I got a text from Lawrence Stella the other day. He's like, "Hey, Bag. I'm emceeing a wedding. I need some jokes." I'm just like, holy shit. First of all, I said to Carrie, and I said, I don't think I've ever been to a wedding that's had an MC. What do they do? And she said, we had one at ours, you idiot.
Yeah. Every wedding, just about every wedding I've ever been to has an MC. So
do they do jokes?
Well, they'll tell some stories that, normally, they'll just tell, a story about the bride or the groom or both, because usually they know one of them really well. And I found most of the time that the ones I've been to, it's been the bride's side of the family that, but at the last wedding it was the groom's brother. So
these two met on Tinder. They thought it was a big evening that turned out a little bit. Is it like that?
They got one on the way. And, last wedding
she was going to wear a different dress, but it turns out the pill doesn't work like it used to.
Oh boy.
Boy.
Hey, so we got talking about your
Brian, our producer Brian goes, my favorite part of the show is just watching you say stupid things and Jeff look at you.
Two things happened last night. You were at the Improv in Hollywood, and I was at an NHL Stanley Cup final playoff game, and we're 8 minutes in. We're still talking about the Improv and weddings.
We haven't talked about. Okay, I guess we should get to this hockey podcast stuff. Oh man, I love this podcast. It's getting better. By the way, we got a guest. Today. Jeff, you grew up with this guy, so why don't you tell everybody about him?
Yeah. So when I was playing junior in Kelowna with the in the WHL and the Dub, I went to school with a fella by the name of Rick Ball, and the people up in Canada would know Rick really well. And actually, he's done some games in the States. He is the play-by-play voice for the television side of the Calgary Flames. And Rick is just the nicest guy in the world. When I met him in high school, he was the nicest guy you'd ever met. He worked his way through radio, got himself through radio, and then he worked his way into TV, and then he worked his way to the play-by-play of the Calgary Flames. And so every night that the Flames are on, he's calling the game, I have to tell my wife, "Hey, that's Rick. I went to school with him." Now Rick's been calling games for I would say in Calgary, it's got to be easy 5, it could be 8 to 10 years, probably closer to 10. So can you imagine as many times I've watched the Flames over that period of time? Every time I hear his voice and he comes on, I got to tell Michelle that, hey, I went to school with him. But Rick's done great. He usually works with Kelly Rudy, who also does color for the Hockey Night in Canada. And then the end of last year with Greg Millen. And those guys are 2 ex-NHL goalies. So Rick is a great guy. He's originally from Kelowna, lives in obviously Calgary now. So we'll have him on today. Ask him about what's going on in Calgary and what he sees around the league. Ask him about the finals with 2 ex-Flames front and center for the Florida Panthers in Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett, and just what he kind of sees overall in the league, and you know what he sees in Calgary in the finals.
A couple people probably confused. Well, I thought you grew up with Jeff Ian. Jeff would go off and play hockey during the season, and he would go to school. So there's a learning part right there. They were young enough that they're still going to school while playing hockey, and making money for the man. Child labor laws. Anyway, how about
that's good, and I really enjoy it. I'm sure it's still the same. So you're going to school, but your practice is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Or noon, or 11. Just totally torpedoed everything with the schooling. But he had a lot of good. We grew up in Terrace, and then when I played in Kelowna, that's where I met Rick. And he was such a good guy. He still is. And you'll see today what kind of person he is.
I seen a guy last night that I done comedy with for quite a while, Todd Rex. His kid is 13 years old and playing for the Junior Kings. And I was talking to him a little bit. And he was showing me some videos. I looked at this kid. The kid's like almost 6 feet, 5'11" or something like that, 13 years old, right? And the coordination on this kid just made me incensed, because I never had that coordination. Even now, I can't do anything that this kid was doing. It was very impressive, very impressive. Do you find when you're coaching those kids out in Las Vegas, Nevada, otherwise known as the Vegas Knights' hometown, that their coordination is way above where you were at 13?
Yeah, the resources available are amazing, but the kids athletically are just there. I don't know. I don't know if the word's superior, but these kids are gifted. Technology in some cases is help, but I would agree that I was at the Junior Kings. So Michael and I went to the Junior Kings tryouts on Friday.
Did you end up?
Yeah, we did go, and you were invited, remember? But then you had to go burn the midnight oil up at the Comedy Store in Melrose.
I'm in the show business.
That's right. So we went over and watched the Junior Kings, and I was talking to a guy at the rink yesterday, and Michael was telling me, so the Junior Kings program obviously is further along than what you would have in Vegas or in other places, probably in the Southwest. I think their U14 or U15 team was 3rd in the nation last year, or maybe won it. So we watched these kids, and to just kind of build on what Ian was saying, I might even have seen your buddy's son out there if he was on the ice, because we were there from about 4 to 7 on Friday, and these kids can all skate. Their ability, their edge work is second to none. And I think if you look and would say the biggest difference, their acceleration is better, but the edge work on these kids and these guys coming into the NHL and the game now, because they're working on it when they're so much younger, is so much superior to when we came up. And their ability to hit the gas and go from A to B is unreal, but their edge work is crazy. And, you know, when we came up, it was like, hey, you got the puck to the red line, you rimmed it in, or you dumped it in, you did something. You didn't handle it. Only a couple guys handled it. Now everybody handles the puck. And I think what I'd like to see, as you know, because sometimes the cart gets in front of the horse, just a little bit better passing and awareness of where you are on the ice. I think, you know, the game happens so fast that's the next part of the game for these young guys to kind of, and girls to understand, you know, passing the puck, how important that is, and understanding where you are on the ice. And, but yeah, it's incredible. So the junior Knights, the Coyotes, the junior Kings, and the junior Ducks, these are amazing programs. These that have spawned out of these NHL teams being in these cities.
So question for you, Michael works for an agency that represents NHL players. Is he is he scouting? Is he already scouting for talent?
Yeah. So Michael, we'll get Michael on one day. I don't know if he has a non-disclosure, like so he can't do anything outside of his agent work, because you never know, right? When you're dealing with younger people or anybody, you got to make sure that everything's above board. But so Michael worked with the San Jose Sharks. So Michael played the University of Michigan. Michael Chason played minor hockey in Vegas, University of Michigan, left.
Drop the name.
Yeah, I did. But I've known Michael since he's been since he came into this world, so I think I can drop his name. And or the University of Michigan. He played in the USHL, and then he got into the San Jose Sharks organization as a scout. Then 2 or 3 years as an assistant coach with the Barracuda in the American League. Now he's moved over to the agency side. He works with CAA out of LA, which is Pat Brisson, and they've got some huge guys in the league. I think they have Eichel. Like with the Knights, I think they have Waugh, and they might have Barbashev. I'm not sure, but they got some big names all over the league. And so he's out. He's in charge of kind of recruiting and looking after the younger kids that are on the cusp of moving on to junior or elevated players, you know, at their minor hockey level. And that's where it is now. And then he's not the only guy. There's all these agencies are looking at these kids that are 15, 16 years old.
Do you have
when
did agents start sniffing around you? How old were you?
Just before the draft, maybe. So I was 16 when I played in the Western Hockey League. So maybe towards the end of my first year in the league, as we got into my second year, 16, 17 years old, that's when I got in contact with a bunch of the agents that are still around the game today. So a lot of these guys have been
how
around
many
a long
meetings?
time.
How many meetings did you have before you chose?
I would say 5 or 6, probably.
And what sent you over with the agency? What was what made you pick the one you picked?
You know what? I mean, it's kind of, you know, I guess who you're most comfortable with. It's a bit of a sales job and what they can do as well. And, you know, their relationships with organizations, but you don't know who you're going to get drafted by, if you're going to get drafted at all. So I would say comfort with what, you know, they're telling you, what they do. And so back in the day, it was Bill Waters who left to become the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then Rick Curran bought him out. And I'm not sure the name of that agency, but so like Donnie Meehan was around then. He's been around forever. Rolly Thompson's been around forever. Rick Curran's been around forever. Pat Brisson's been around forever. Neil Sheehy, ex-player, ex-Flame, Calgary Flames, an agent. So you got all these guys. And there's way more of them too out there. And I mean, it's quite the business. And I think that, you know, you're probably on your phone with your agent
right now,
or someone from the family multiple times a week. Sometimes you might not talk to them at all, but if it's not going very well, like I'll give you an example. Hankinson is Brock Besser's agent in Vancouver. Well, the organization said to Ben Hankinson this year, hey, if you can find us, go out and talk to the GMs. If you can find us a trading partner in the parameters of what we'll do, we'll look to move Brock Besser. So I would say in a case like that, Besser was probably talking to him in some cases daily, but at least 2, 3, 4 times a week. And sometimes the agent's got to be a bit of a, someone that just kind of helps calm the waters for you too. So I just think on initial contact with whoever it is, and a guy like McDavid or Eichel or Connor Bedard would have, every agent would want to represent them. So trying to work your way through who's who would have been very interesting. And Connor Bedard probably had an agent, I'm guessing, when he was 13 or 14 years old, and he'll get drafted this year.
So he was great. He was great last night. He was on with Gretzky in the panel for TNT, and he actually chirped Biz, which was pretty funny. But so young looking, he looks like a little boy, right? It's just crazy.
They're young.
We'll talk about the NHL, the Stanley Cup playoffs later. We're going to go to our interview right now, which is brought to you by HeadyGear.com. Go to HeadyGear.com, buy yourself a backpack, put your own swag on it. It's actually really cool. Great website. Use the code word BAG, get yourself a discount, and be involved with the NHL's Heady Gear. Let's go to our guest, Rick Ball. We got Rick Ball from the Calgary Flames. Rick started out with Jeff. They were cohorts back in the W, and here they are now. Rick is in Kelowna. Jeff is in Vegas. I am in Long Beach, California. And let the games begin. How you doing, Rick?
I'm well. 3 BC boys scattered all across North America.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
Together. It's magic. Yeah, it is. I'm great. Yeah, Jeff was he played for the Kelowna Wings junior hockey back in the 80s, and we're the same age. I think Jeff might be a year younger, and all the Wings went to my high school when they were here, so I got to know them, even though I wasn't playing, obviously. But yeah, small world. He reached out to me. Pardon me?
Were you the voice of the Wings at that time? Were you?
No, I was still a kid. I was like 16, 17 years old. So I was in high school. It was funny though. I was just having this conversation with my sister the other day. She goes, hey, how did you wind up getting into broadcasting? And we used to have, in my school, our custodian's name was Wayne Horning, and he was an old hockey coach. And he was it's so Canada, perfect, right? Yeah. He's pushing a broom and coaching hockey, and was the color commentator on the junior hockey broadcast. I don't know if Jeff remembers.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Guy named Brian Cooling was the play-by-play guy.
Bingo, yeah.
And Wayne Horning, who was the custodian at the high school, was the color guy because he was a coach. So, he got an inkling I was interested. I was a terrible hockey player. Actually, I loved the sport, but I stopped playing when I started playing football, which I gravitated towards when I was like grade 6. So hockey kind of ended for me, but I always loved it. But anyway, he got an inkling that I was interested in broadcasting and asked me one day if he could introduce me to Brian Cooling, who was the sports director at the local radio station. And Brian took a liking to me and would have me call in reports. I play in a basketball tournament, a high school basketball tournament. At the end of the tournament, I phone a report. They run it the next day on the radio station. And I thought, that's pretty cool.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I was always great, by the way. The report, yeah.
So
people in Kelowna, they were stunned in Kelowna that I never made the NBA based on all the reports they kept hearing on the radio.
Yeah.
But that's kind of got my foot in the door. And that's how I got started. Then I went to broadcast school at BCIT, came back to Kelowna. That's when I started working full-time in the business. And then ultimately, by that point, the Wings were long gone. It was junior A, started doing some junior A play-by-play. And then the Kelowna Rockets moved to town in 95. And that's when I started doing play-by-play full-time and really learned to love it. It's kind of a goal of mine. And when I had a chance to do it, I knew this is the path I wanted to be on. And that led to ultimately getting a job in the NHL. It did start sort of back when I knew Jeff in high school. It kind of nudged. It's funny what things might nudge you onto a path sometimes, right? Wayne Horning's not there. I don't meet the sports director. Who knows? I could be, bookkeeping or something.
And Brian Cooling had a great voice, and Brian was such a good guy. And then bringing you in. So you worked at the AM radio station, right? And you were doing all the reports. You went down to BCIT, you come back, you start working with the Rockets. how long were you with them for, Rick, before, and like kind of just walk us through the Rockets on towards the Flames? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, well, I came back to Kelowna, got a job, and I didn't do play-by-play full-time for like 5 years after I started because the Rockets hadn't come to town and nobody was really even doing full-time play-by-play of Junior A. So I was, part of the zany morning crew telling fart jokes at 6 o'clock in the morning. That was basically what I did. Yeah. The sports guy. Yeah. So that's kind of what I was doing sports and, and trying to be funny. And then when the Rockets came, I had a chance to step in and do the play-by-play. I'd done a little bit with the Junior A team, so it was perfect timing. That was 95, Jeff. So to answer your question, from 95, I did the Western Hockey League, rode the buses. As you know, Jeff, that's what the guys do when they're doing junior hockey. You're like the players. You're climbing on that old iron lung and rumbling across the frozen tundra of the prairies of Canada. I did that for 5 years. It was unbelievable experience. Like, I learned so much about calling games, but just the culture of the sport at that level, being around it as much as I was, by the end, I was getting tired of the stuff around the play-by-play. I love that part, but the travel was killing me. But I would have not exchanged that experience for anything. It was the single biggest reason I was able to take the next step ultimately. And it was a great 5 years, a lot of fun.
To let people know, who were some of the names on that Kelowna Rockets team when you started out?
The guy that I covered that probably had the longest career was Scott Hannon. Played, drafted by San Jose, played there a long time, went to Colorado, came back. He played over, I think he might have played 1,100 games. Ceddy Eddy, defenseman. Scott, they had a lot of tough guys that first year. Their fourth line that first year I covered them was Scott Parker, Todd Fedoruk, and Dale Purington. So anytime a game got 2 goals one way or the other, it'd start the circus music. I mean, and Jeff, they played in the old Memorial Arena for the first 4 years. And that thing is like, it's a tiny little rink. The boards are as high as your shoulders. It was a gong show. So they were a tough team that first year. Parker had a National Hockey League career as a scrapper. In terms of, like I said, Hannon had a long career. Václav Rada played in Buffalo. Then later on, they had a lot of tough guys. Travis Mullen came through there. He had a pretty good National Hockey League career. Just trying to think of all the guys that wound up playing in the show. There were lots, but Hannon would be the guy who played the longest. So they weren't that successful on the ice for the first 5 years. Their really great years came just after I left.
Mm-hmm.
I say it's a coincidence. Others might blame me, but that's when they had the Shea Webbers, and they had so many great defensemen come through that team, right? Like Shea Weber played there, and Duncan Keith played with the Rockets, and Tyler Myers and Shen, and like they had just tons of guys who came through. Josh Georges was a local guy who was an undrafted out of a bantam player who wound up playing and having a National Hockey League career. The Rockets, I haven't done the math, but I would not be surprised if they've produced over the last 20 years more National Hockey League defensemen than any other team in major junior hockey. So it was a great experience.
Have you been back in the building lately? When was the last time you were in that building?
Well, it's probably been 10 years since I've gone to a game. So like my last year here was the first year in the new building.
Uh-huh.
I haven't been in Memorial Arena in forever. Like you drive by it now, it doesn't, it looks like is it a parkade? They played hockey in there. It's still open, but Jeff, I try to remember the original rink, like where you played when you were in Kelowna with the Wings back in the 80s. Like a normal hockey rink is 200 by 85. That was 180 by 80. So 5 feet narrow and 20 feet shorter. I used to feel bad for goalies. A shot from center ice was a scoring chance in that building.
It was crazy. And the last time I was in that rink was it had to be 5-10 years ago now. It was for Canada Day, because they used to do the Canada Day celebrations down there. But I remember we had Cam Lazarek, who played with Mick Vukota and Tony Horacek. Talk about tough guys. And Cam was probably the toughest of the three of them. Mick went on to have a great career. Tony went on to have a great career. But I would never forget one night in warm-up, Tony could shoot the puck so hard he broke the glass behind the net. I remember the coach coming in, I think it was Mark Peasant at the time. The game was delayed. He's like, Horacek, like, because the boards were so high behind the net. He goes, how did you do that? Like, keep the puck down. He was giving it to him before the game. But it was a gong show. And of course we played Kamloops like 16 times. and they didn't really have a big rink. I was like in shock watching the Memorial Cup because they got this beautiful new rink in Kamloops. I'm like, that's not like the rink we used to play in. But in Kelowna was the same. It was just like a matchbox. And of course, the game is so much faster now, but it was so much, and it has its physicality, but so much more physical then. And like, we were talking about the finals and how it's a scrum with Florida after every whistle. It kind of reminds me of old school hockey, right? That's the kind of what you used to see in junior, and back in the day, you'd see that after every whistle.
Yeah, it was a different game back. I mean, it's obviously changed at the NHL level too. I mean, the days of having a couple guys at the end of your bench just in case things go squirrely are over. I mean, there are guys who can still scrap. I covered Calgary; they've had Lucic for the last few years, probably still the toughest guy in the league. But he could still take a regular shift, right? There was an era where it's funny. I was reading a story about that movie Goon, which is obviously a cartoonish take on the whole thing, where the guy who can't skate winds up playing in minor pro just because he can punch, but. Wasn't that far off in the day. Like, and the game was I don't know how you feel about this, Jeff. I've talked to a lot of guys who played in that era. There was something reassuring about having a guy at the end of the bench that you knew if things got a little wacky, he could take care of not only himself, but you guys too. And those guys don't exist much anymore because the game's changed so much.
No, they don't. And you know what? It was part of our upbringing. Like, that's the way it was in junior. That's the way it was in the American League and the show and the International League. And, you look at a guy, you bring up Milan Lucic, like he's played close to 1,200 games now, right? Rick, he's got to be there, right? And him in warm up, when they see him in warm up, he puts the lid on things. Like, you know what? The only guy I can think of that would kind of go after him was McDermott in Colorado. Him and Reeves, I don't even think, and Reeves is as tough as they come to. I don't even know if those two have ever fought.
They've never fought.
Yeah, and so
Not once.
Here's two of the toughest guys of their era. Now, Luch is a little bit older than Revo, but the thing about it is same thing. These guys put a lid on things. Now a heavy team is a guy that can get the puck off the boards and finishes his check once in a while and kicks in 10 to 15 goals. Like, that's a heavy player. A heavy player back in the day was a guy like Brad May, a guy, Bob Probert, these guys, Joey Koshers of the world, that Dave Browns that they could rip you stem to stern, right? And now it's totally changed. That was a heavy player back then. I think Jerome McGinley would fit into that mold, and Olin Nolan, where they had, greasy but could play, but these guys that end up getting in 10 or 15 fights a year. Now, I don't know, like Lucic last year, I don't know who wants to fight him, but I would imagine he was probably 3, 4, maybe 5 fights, right?
I think he had 6 fights. I'd have to look, but it was interesting. You just mentioned that, Jeff. I was looking at the Hockey Fights website, and I'll check it out. Like when you mentioned Curtis McDermott, Lucic caught him with a good one last year, by the way, and laid him out. I'm not. Curtis McDermott's as tough and he's huge too. He's like 6'5", 240. He's a big dude. But that's the thing about hockey fighters
that's
too.
2 players in today's game.
That's 3 Johnny Gaudreau's.
Right.
It's funny. I was talking to Brian McGregor, and he said, "I don't care how tough you are." Like the toughest guy ever to scrap on skates has taken one of the chops and wound up face down on the ice at some point in his career. It just happens, right? So, but yeah, it's there's only a handful of guys left. Luch, McDermott, you mentioned Reeves, Tom Wilson, but thing about like Wilson can play, man. They played him with Ovechkin a fair bit as a winger. Like, it's so you have to be able to contribute in other ways in this day and age. Where before, if you could fight and only play 2 minutes a night, but I want to tell the story real quick, guys. But the Flames, this gets back to the having the security of having a guy like that on your team, even in today's game. The Flames are playing Dallas in the first round of the playoffs last season. Jamie Benn was, he likes to get under guys' skin. He's a big guy too, and was hitting everything that moved. There was a play in the previous game where there was a pileup along the net. The whistle went, and he stuck his stick in the face of one of the Flames players through the mesh and pushed on his cheek. And he was just kind of running rampant. The next game, opening face-off, Luch is out there to start the game. He's probably taken 5 face-offs in his career. He lines up at center ice with Ben, right? And they dropped the puck, and he skated around the whole shift. Didn't even try and get the puck, just yakking in Ben's ear. Nothing happened, and Jamie Benn did not do any of the stuff that he had done the previous game for the rest of the series.
Mhm.
So he didn't have to fight, but just the threat was enough to settle things down.
I think in today's game, like when Luchik's on the ice, those guys are more like, you used to have the guy on the end of the bench who would put the lid on things. Those guys staying on the ice now keeps the lid on things. You don't want them in the box. And it's funny, Tom Wilson, was talking to George McPhee at last year at the end of the season, and we were at an event, and I bumped into him, and we were talking about his draft picks, and he says that Tom Wilson is his favorite draft pick of all time, because when they took him, they were really maligned for taking him. Like he said, he took a lot of flack for it. And he said what this kid's developed into, which is really, I mean, Tom Wilson's your ultimate hybrid tough guy now. He can run you through the boards, he can score, and he can take care of things when it gets out of hand. And him and Ovechkin on the same line, I think you might want to pick Wilson over Ovechkin, right? If push comes to shove. And this is a guy that's kind of evolved with the game, but he still brings kind of that old school mentality. And one thing about Wilson, he can skate. And most of your older, not always, but some of your tough guys in past, just the best guys in the world, not always the greatest skaters, but Tom Wilson is kind of defies that. And now, of course, as you know, Rick, if you can't skate, like I think of a guy like Zadorov in Calgary, big, strong, runs through guys. He's 6'5". I don't know if people realize how good a skater he is.
He's a really good skater.
Yeah, he blows people up. What did he have? 10 goals last year or something for the Flames? Hat trick in one game. And this guy, when he came in, they would have wanted him to be more of a hammer. Now he's a deterrent, and he's getting you 10 goals because he's using his size and his skating and his intimidation to his advantage. It's pretty amazing, but there's not a lot of those guys left, right?
No, there isn't. It's probably for the better, but sort of getting back to the point I was making about the Lucic bench story, there's still a place for that. Still a physical game.
Absolutely.
I had a coach say to me one time, I was talking about a player that had a lot of skill but wasn't having much success, and I said, I don't get it. The guy has a lot of skill, and he's smart too. Like, what's going on? He goes, you don't need to be smart to play hockey. You need testosterone. And I thought, okay, that pretty much sums it up. And I don't think that will ever change in a sport like hockey.
It's not science.
No.
So right now the play where the Stanley Cup playoffs are 2-0 for the Vegas Golden Knights. The other team has two players that were a huge part of the Calgary Flames last year. I have a theory that Vegas has seen these guys enough that they know what's going on compared to the other guys that Florida's already beaten. What do you think of that? Do you think Vegas is a little more calm with Tkachuk and Bennett because they have played against them so many times?
Yeah, they've got the book on them a little bit. Maybe. I mean, listen, Tkachuk's been unbelievable. I mean, he had a great year last year with the Flames.
Absolutely.
And you can't deny what he's done here in the playoffs. But the single biggest reason Florida's where they are is Bobrovsky, right? I mean, he's been out of his brain. Game 2, when we're recording this, was last night, and he got pulled, didn't look very good. So I'm not trying to take away from the other guys because it's more than just a goaltender, but look at Florida. If Pittsburgh beats Columbus on the last night of the season, they're not in the playoffs. And they squeak in by the skin of their teeth. Calgary had a better record than Florida did last year and missed, believe it or not. But it just goes to show you how tight the league is. Like this sort of notion, there used to be a cliche in hockey. You don't just want to squeak in and get knocked out the first round. Like, hey, LA won as an 8th seed, St. Louis, Florida's there as an 8th seed. Like, you can do it now because there's really not as big a gap, especially in the salary cap era, between the first place team and the 16th place team. Sorry, I'm kind of digressing. Yeah, I'm not sure if Florida having a book on Tkachuk is helping, maybe. But I just think Florida's a really good team. And they're doing, like, Aiden Hill, they've gone through 5 goalies this year. They started with Laurent Brossoit in the playoffs, and he got hurt. He'd been out for months with an injury. They go to Aiden Hill, and yet they're still winning. So they're doing it with an unheralded guy between the pipes because their blue line is unbelievable. Like, I think they have I don't want to say maybe it's underappreciated. I think most people know it, but all 3 of their pairings are really strong. So I think that's where the success of the Vegas Golden Knights starts. And being able to contain Tkachuk and Bennett for that matter, and the other guys on that Florida team, I think starts and doesn't end, but starts really with a terrific defense core. They're really good.
Hey, so Rick, like when you're sitting there watching this series, and you know Vegas as well as anybody, you see him all the time in the Pacific Division. Obviously, you know Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett really well. Both those guys have gone to Florida, and I wouldn't say Tkachuk's had a new lease on life because, like you said, with Calgary, he was unbelievable last year, and he's a big reason why they were there. But Sam Bennett has finally started to reach his potential.
Yes.
What do you kind of what do you take away from that? Like, what are you seeing from him that maybe wasn't there in Calgary? Because this guy, I mean, he's like a heat-seeking missile out there too. Like Tkachuk laid it on Eichel, but I don't think there's many guys that hit harder in the league than Bennett. He's brought the physical aspect and he's bringing offense to Florida. What do you see as his, or maybe both of them, the biggest differences from when you saw him in Calgary?
Well, Tkachuk just sort of continued on where he left off last year. Like that last season in Calgary with Lindholm and Gaudreau on that line, I think that was the best line in the NHL last year. I mean, they put up the most points. So, you know, I'm not surprised he's doing it. Bennett definitely has taken a step forward. He was always a good playoff performer. I asked Bob Hartley one time when he was coaching why he's so much better in the playoffs than he is in the regular season. And he said, because the stuff that works in the playoffs is a penalty in the regular. Like I'm talking about those big hits and some of the stuff that he does, the physicality, that would send him to the box more often in the regular season and less so in the playoffs when they let a little bit more go. So he is maybe one of those guys whose game is built for the postseason, right? Where you can get away with more of that stuff. But I also just think he's matured. He's kind of learned more what the NHL game is about and how he fits into the overall structure of the team that he's on. He's there's no denying he's always had the tools. And you're right. He's, as you said, a heat-seeking missile. Some guys just get it later than other guys do. And I think he's at a stage now where he just sort of, his hockey IQ is probably better at the NHL level than it was the first few years that he was in Calgary. Like I said to people all the time, they say the Flames never really utilized him properly. And I said, when he was in Calgary, he had 5 different head coaches. It wasn't like one guy wasn't like sometimes you get in the coach's bad books, you never get out, right? Mm-hmm. But he had Hartley, he had Bill Peters, he had Glenn Gulletson, he had Jeff Ward, and he had Daryl Sutter. And really never got sort of out of the muck with any of those guys. But it's working now in Florida. I'm glad to see. I like Sam. He's a terrific guy. And I knew at some point he'd probably figure it out because definitely the tools were there and the willingness to be a punisher as well in terms of playing physically. So I'm not surprised that it's happened. And like I said, some guys just take longer than other guys do.
So, and I'll let Lord Begg jump in here after this. What do you see in this series? Because now, like, you go back every other night. Normally, these guys have 2 days off between the games in Vegas and Florida, and then they'll get 2 days off again after. They have some time to make some adjustments. And as Paul Maurice said, take a breath. What have you seen in this series? What surprised you? And what do you think Florida has to do or Vegas has to do? Vegas to keep the train on the tracks and rolling, and Florida to get the train on the tracks.
Yeah, I haven't really, I don't know if I can break it down in any sort of detail other than I'm a little surprised that Vegas has scored as much as they have, only because Bobrovsky has been so unbeatable for the first 3 rounds of the playoffs. So maybe they've found the hole in his game. So for me, Florida, it's pretty simple. And it's funny, I did football for years too, play-by-play. As a quick aside, and people always ask me, what do you like, which do you like calling more? And I go, I love them both. Hockey's a way more fun sport to do play-by-play because it's fluid and fast. It's got the physical element like football does. Football's a better sport to talk about only because it's so tactical, right? Every play's a set play, right? So there's a lot more to break down. And often hockey comes down to which goalie plays better in some ways. And Bobrovsky's been better than every guy he's faced until now. And for Florida to get back in the series, he's got to bring that back to the table, I think. Because I think Vegas is a better team. I mean, I talked about their blue line. Like I did a game for TNT when they were playing in the Winnipeg series. And I'd seen a lot of Vegas, all season, obviously, and since they've been in the league. But to watch them again in a playoff game like that and call it, I just looked at their 3 defensive pairings and that's as good as any blue line in the National Hockey League and the single biggest reason that they're where they are. So Florida's got to figure out how to get through that crew, and then Bobrovsky's got to step his game back up to where it's been up until this point in the playoffs.
Interesting. You've talked about the what's going on right now in the Stanley Cup playoffs. While that's been going on, everything's changed in Calgary. You've got a new general manager. You got and now they're looking for a coach. What do you think they're going to go after for a coach? Because as you say, this is probably the sixth coach in 7 years. How many coaches?
Yeah, well, okay, this will be my 10th season doing the Flames on television. So since I've been there, I just ran through them. Hartley was there when I got there. Then they hired Glenn Gulletson. Then they hired Bill Peters. And that went sideways for reasons out of their own control, but we all know why he left. Then they promoted Jeff Ward, who was Peters' associate coach, to head coach. And then they hired Daryl again. That's 5 coaches in the last 9 seasons, right? So it'd be great to get some stability in that position. I totally agree. So I'm not sure which way they're going to go. I have a feeling like they've got a great guy named Mitch Love at the AHL level who's done an unbelievable job with Calgary's American League team. And they were the top team and for a team that people say doesn't have many good prospects in the pipeline to do that well the last couple of years, I think there's a real serious consideration being given to him possibly taking over. They also have experience on the bench. Kirk Muller was the associate coach for Daryl Sutter. He's been a head coach in the NHL before. Ryan Huska was he was a terrific junior coach. He coached in Kelowna coincidentally, and also coached their team in Stockton when the farm team was there. So there are lots of potential hires. I don't know that you're going to see one of the old names recycled in Calgary. It might be somebody fresh, and that's my prediction based on the way how long it's taking, that we may see somebody get their first opportunity potentially to be a National Hockey League coach.
Is it exciting for you when it all changes, or is it nerve-wracking? Because I don't know. I don't know. Like your job is on the line too when a new general manager or president comes in, right?
No, it isn't, because I work for the network. The way that it's done done in Canada. A lot of the American teams, the broadcasters who do the regional shows, are employees of the hockey team. But I think almost without exception in this country, it's you work for the network. So I'm not. And I know Craig Conroy really well, right? He's been one of the assistant GMs since I've been here. Terrific guy, and also a guy with a ton of experience as a player. He played over 1,000 games as well. So I thought that was the perfect hire. Some people say, well, he's basically, he's been one of Brad Treliving's right-hand men. How much difference is it going to be? I know Craig, I've talked to him a ton. He definitely has, everybody does, right? We all have our own ideas of what should be done and what should. There's a guy who has to make the final decision, but to just suggest that he's going to do things exactly the way that Brad did, and not that I have a problem with the job that Treliving did. I thought he, for the most part, was an outstanding general manager. Obviously, the Toronto Maple Leafs did too. But I think Craig has his own thoughts on how this team needs to move forward and get better. I'm actually excited to see how it works out. Anytime there's change, there's a sort of anticipation. You don't know how it's going to play out on the ice. Even last year with the big trade they made, getting rid of Tkachuk and at his request and bringing in Huberdeau and Weegar, you always want to see how it plays out. It didn't go very well, but there's always excitement in the air and anticipation to see how it's going to wind up. Unless you,
with the last year's trade and Johnny Gaudreau walking away, the only way everybody's going to be happy is if they win the Stanley Cup, and the chances of that are not very good. So I would Treliving was probably he knew the writing was on the wall as soon as those two things happened, right?
There's some of that. I think that a lot of the pundits felt the Flames did a great job getting back. Huberdeau had as many points as Huberdeau did.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. He had the single biggest. I think Huberdeau's going to have a bounce back year this year because he's way better than he was last season with the Flames. That was the single biggest drop in points from one year to another to the next in NHL history, a 60-point drop. So I bet you he gets 90 points next year, and it's a whole other story, right? But yeah, there was some conflict between Treliving and Sutter. It wasn't overt. It wasn't like they were at each other's throats all the time. I think there was a difference in philosophy, and that was a big factor in Brad leaving. Because I know they made him an offer early in the season to sign an extension. He said no. So there were a lot of factors. And, whether he felt that maybe this team's headed towards a dry spell, did that lead into his decision-making process? I have no idea. I think there are probably other things that trump that, though, in terms of why he's not a Flames GM anymore.
Hey, Rick, let's talk a little bit about the changes and what's in store for this team. There's some excitement because finally, about 10 or 15 years behind schedule, but there's a new rink coming. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's great. Obviously, we watch the Flames a lot, and watch you guys, you and Kelly, and you and Rick, or sorry, Rick and Millen.
Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, Millen, yeah, great, yeah.
Yeah, Greg. Sorry, I'm like stuck trying to name drop and I couldn't do it. But
worst name dropper ever.
yeah, my nephew's going to be on me for this. But tell me about. I think the Flames, the cupboards are not empty. The cupboards are full. Their goaltending, arguably, depending on what they do with Wolf, the kid coming up from the minors, you're probably looking at Markstrom, who is going to put you in the upper echelon of the Western Conference of goaltending if he plays like he can. Their defense is pretty good. Their forwards are a veteran group with some young guys. Like, so the cupboards aren't bare, but wouldn't you agree that they kind of have to pick up, and Darryl was check, but I think they could use a little infusion of pace of play into their lineup. Walker Dewar came up, Peltier came up. Those young guys help energize, but they both can, Peltier's quick and Dewar can skate. So what do you see?
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of what has to happen in Calgary?
I agree 100%. We, gets back to the conversation we had at the start of this, just how the game has changed and you have to be able to skate. And almost every good team in the NHL has some youthful energy in their lineup. And the Flames didn't really have that. They finally did later in the season. And I think this is maybe where some of the conflict between Darryl Sutter and Brad Treliving was. Like, Brad would bring these guys up and then they wouldn't get played. It reminds me of that scene in Moneyball, where where Brad Pitt as Billy Bean is talking to the manager, and he's like, you got to play these guys. And he's like, hey, I make the roster decisions. And so he wound up trading the guy playing over the guy he wanted to play. But it's a good scene because it's true, right? You got Darryl Sutter. I'm the coach. I decide the roster. You give me the players. I decide how to use them. And I think that's somewhere there was a real disagreement. So it gets to your point. I think they do need to inject some speed into their lineup, and it starts with some of those young guys because Peltier is a speedy guy. You mentioned Dewar. He did play a fair bit down the stretch and really earned a spot as a regular on that fourth line, and potentially some other guys stepping up as well. But the biggest thing this season, I think, in terms of getting better, and it's the reality we touched on earlier, your goaltending has to be better. Markstrom really didn't find his A game until February, maybe. He was really playing below his standard for a long time, and it was tough to overcome, giving up a soft goal, most games. So especially when you lose 2/3 of your best line in the offseason. And I think I would be shocked if he's not a lot better. And that would be the single biggest step forward for the Flames in terms of turning things around this year.
How much of the, you don't even get your own province up there, right? You got to share it with our friends to the north there up in Edmonton. There's a lot of play back and forth. These cities are 3.5 hours apart by car. They're not very far apart. How much of Edmonton's success and having the two superstars up there doing video game kind of stuff, how much do you think that kind of puts pressure on the management and the players in the market? I mean, do you think it's got a little bit of spillover, or do you think they're fairly focused on just what they're doing?
Yeah, I don't. It certainly affects the fan bases. I don't know that it affects what you're trying to win the Stanley Cup no matter what, right? You could be a standalone team in the middle of nowhere. You still want to, the goal is still the same. So
name of that team is called Winnipeg.
Yeah. Boy, they have some problems. I love Rick Bowness. I thought he did a great job, and they really started to stumble down the stretch. And some of the things that when a coach just quits in the middle of the year, like Paul Maurice did, you got something going on there that's not right. I thought Bowness had maybe addressed some of those things, but it seemed to unravel at the end. So I think, maybe there is some reaction to what the Oilers are doing, but listen, you're not going to, there's no Connor. Connor Bedard, I think, is going to be great, but there's not like the Flames are going to get a Connor McDavid at the draft, right? So you just have to just keep trying to build a better team and hopefully put the pieces together that can get you to the promised land. So, it is interesting though, guys. One of my first experiences as a guy who grew up in BC and then went to Calgary, I knew there was the rivalry. I'd done a bunch of Hockey Night in Canada games too in the two cities between the two teams, but I never lived in one of those cities. And early on when I was in Calgary, I emceed a roundtable with a couple of the longtime alumni guys. And Jim Poplinski, Landon McDonald, and Theo Fleury were on these days, and we're talking. And at the time, it looked like the Flames and the Oilers might both be half decent that year. And I said, boy, it's been a while since both the Oilers and the Flames were good at the same time. And this is exciting, right? The Battle of Alberta could be back. Wouldn't that be terrific if both teams are competitive? And Chip Plisky looks at me, he goes, what are you talking about? I said, what do you mean? He goes, I want the Oilers to go 0-82 every year because I hope they never win another game in the history of the franchise. And I thought, oh, that kind of put it in perspective. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. And that's exactly the mindset in the two cities. Makes it a lot of fun. I mean, there's nothing that I find makes a game more entertaining than a bit of hate, right? Sometimes I think players are maybe too buddy-buddy. So when you see two teams that really don't like each other and two fan bases that hate each other, it just ups the intensity, and that is not a bad thing.
That's my favorite Calgary alumni, and I'm going to be honest with you. I see him doing stuff around the city all the time. Is Tim Hunter? That guy.
Great guy.
If there was more of Tim Hunter in every team, there would be no game that compared. It's amazing what he does for the community.
Yeah, great guy. They've got a terrific alumni. Like a huge chunk of those guys that won in '89 still live in Calgary, right? They're all still there. A lot of guys stick around. It's a great city. You know, people think, oh, it's cold, and as a guy who grew up in Kelowna, lived in Vancouver for 15 years, I love Calgary. It is just a fantastic place to live. And I think the testament is how many guys wind up sticking around. They can move anywhere. And a lot of guys stay. And after living there now for the last 10 years, I can see why.
That's awesome.
It's funny, Rick. We had Tim on, it was, I don't know, 6-8 months ago. And he echoed what Poplinski said. We were talking about, some of the tougher customers he had to face in the league. And he talked about Nicky Fatio was one of the guys and this guy and that guy. But when he got to the Oilers, you could just see the heat index go up. He was ready. He's like, if he could grab I wouldn't want to be one of the ex-Oilers and run into Tim Huntz on the street because he might take you down. I'm telling you what, and he's still in great shape. But you're right. I don't think you see, sometimes in hockey now, and these guys all know each other, probably train a lot of them together. But baseball for me is way too buddy. Like, they're always talking to each other. And you see a little bit more of that. But, I guess part of it is too, the game's changed. They don't want 4-hour games on TV anymore. They want to keep it moving. The sponsors want high energy hockey. So there's not near as much hitting and animosity as there was. Now, when you get to the playoffs, that's kind of a different animal. But I see some changes. Like some people can't believe how undisciplined Florida's been, but really, if you go back 10 or 15 years, Florida's style of play would just fit right in.
Yeah. It's nothing like it. You watch some of those old. I always chuckle when I hear, players back in the '70s had so much more respect. I'm like, are you kidding me? You watch guys, how many sucker punches there were, and guys getting their faces caved in with 30 hits. Like there would be 5 suspensions every game the way they played back then. So that's not a bad thing that's evolved into a better spot, I think. But the other reality is, guys, you play 82 games. Jeff, as a guy who played at the highest level, you can only bring that kind of intensity. So the Flames had a game against the Rangers during the regular season. It was right out of the All-Star break. It was unbelievable. Jacob Trouba was throwing some big hits. There were fights. It was 5-5. It went to overtime. It was an old school hockey game. And I was talking to Lucic after the game, and he was saying how much fun that was. And somebody asked him, wouldn't it be great if you could play every game like that? He goes, we'd all be dead. You can't do it every night. Not for 80. It'd be impossible. So, but during the playoffs, short, relatively much shorter run, and the stakes are a lot higher in terms of what you're playing for. You can sort of keep that level of intensity up, and that's why the postseason is so great.
Right on. Hey, one last question from me, Rick. We'll let you run.
I got two more.
He's got 2. I might have 3. But while we got you, what's the Flames' biggest area that they need to address through the draft or free agency this summer?
That's a good question. I think that they could probably use more speed, as you talked about earlier. That may be able to be done internally. I'm really curious to see how their goaltending plays out. Like, I think Jacob Markstrom still has lots of tread left on the tires, but Dan Vladar is a very good backup goaltender. And you mentioned Dustin Wolf earlier. He's the best goalie that's not in the NHL by a mile. And I've talked to the Flames goaltending staff. Like, Jordan Sigalet's sort of their guru of goaltending, and Jason LaBarbera is their goalie coach. And I said, in this day and age, goalies who aren't 6'3" or 6'4" rarely get a sniff, but there are a few exceptions. And I said UC Soros in Nashville is one of the best goalies in the league. He's like 5'11". And there's a feeling in the Flames organization that Dustin Wolf is better than UC Soros. So I'm really curious to see how quickly they bring him along and work him into the equation, because he has put up unbelievable numbers in the American Hockey League. He's won the goalie of the year twice. He was the MVP of the league, any position last year. Was the goaltender of the year in the Western Hockey League. He's done it at every level. So what does he have left to prove?
Yeah.
And do you make the move and bump him up to the National Hockey League level next season? That's my biggest question. Then they'll have a crowd on the crease because they've got Vladar and Markstrom under contract, but you can change that with the deal. So I'm curious in terms of what might happen in the offseason. That is a big question mark for me. I'm not sure how that all plays out.
Interesting. They think he's better than Soros, huh?
That's what I was told by some of the goalie guys inside the Flames organization based on what he's done in the American Hockey League. Because we were comparing those two direct comparables, because Dustin Wolf's like, he's not tall and he's about this big. Like, he's really small, but he's playing at the pro level, the second best league in the world, and lights out. So he's got something.
That's something. How much fun are you having? Is it fun? Like you guys were both 14, 15, 16, sitting in high school with your coach pushing a broom around. Is it you're a Canadian kid, you're calling games. How much fun is it?
It's interesting you asked that, because it's awesome on every level. I love it. But listen, you're a stand-up comedian and you've been really successful. You probably love your job, but there are days you're on a plane or in a hotel somewhere, at some point it becomes work, even though it's your dream work. So I always have to, once in a while, just sort of step back and give myself a little break and think, this is pretty cool.
Right.
And, you're sitting in Bell Center calling the Canadians and the Flames, or, I did Hockey Night for 3 years, calling all sorts of games. I did, you're sitting there and you're doing a Montreal-Washington game and you got Ovechkin and Carey Price on, and you're on Hockey Night Canada. Like, it's a job, but that is pretty fantastic. So when I started this thing, phoning reports from my own basketball tournaments, if somebody would have told me then that I'd be here now, I would have given away everything I had and said, let's do it. So I can't complain. And I tell people often, if you hear me whining too much about travel or whatever, traveling with the team too, you're on a charter, you're eating steak. Like, it's not that bad.
Right.
I tell them to give me a slap because it's a pretty good gig.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do. There's always going to be, a little bit of it's work, but as long as you're having fun, that's what counts. My other question is, which do you think is a better, which would you rather be? Would you rather be Phoenix, that is just in a complete shit show, or would you rather be Columbus, which is just milk bread? Just boring.
Well, just in terms of lifestyle, I'd much rather be in Phoenix. So if it's going to be horseshit, I'd rather be in a nice sunny spot. Actually, Columbus isn't a bad city, but
it's just I'm just when you there's two there I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and there's two things going on right now. It's just that team that's just in the league, and then there's the team that's just everything's going wrong, but they're just trying to hold on. Which would you rather be part of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the uncertainty of being in Phoenix right now would be unsettling. Like in my role, it would be. You're a player, you're going to make your money, you can live wherever you want, right? But for a guy like if I was the voice of doing television for the Arizona Coyotes, and then not knowing where we're going to be next year. I mean, I guess we'll be there next year, but after that, who knows? And maybe I'm not the guy. Like, there's that uncertainty, but I would be unsettling. So on those terms, I'd rather be in Columbus. But it's like the Blue Jackets have been funny. Like, that's a pretty good hockey market. They love their team there. Like, you go to games, the energy in that building is great. It's a pretty good hockey town, but they haven't had much to cheer for. So, I'm curious to see how now they got Babcock. We'll see how that works. He's back in, but
I can tell you my I did a thing with Babcock. This is what this is my introduction to Babcock. Hey, Bag, you're a big bitch.
I'll tell you a story about Babcock because I covered him when he was coaching junior hockey in Spokane.
Oh no!
And He was. They were really good too. So the whole 5 years I was in Kelowna doing junior hockey, he was with the Chiefs. So I'd go talk to him. You know, you go down, you talk to the coach, the other team, and he was always priming for information. I could tell he was really friendly, but I could tell he was secretly trying to find out what was going on with the team, right? So we're chit chatting before we put the tape recorder on to do the pregame interview. And I won't say who it was because it would be unfair, but there was a player who was a high draft pick on their team that wasn't playing that night. And I said, you know, what's up with Joe Smith? And Babcock goes, oh, he's got a stomach problem. I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, he makes me sick to my stomach. So here's
Welcome to Columbus.
Yeah. So I laughed. It was off the air, so I'm not going to use it. We're just chit-chatting, right? So I go up to the broadcast booth, and the newspaper guy for the Kelowna paper was up there. He traveled with the team too. And so I told him that story. I kind of chuckled. He puts it in the paper.
Oh, jeez.
In a story that he was doing about the kid that Mike was talking about.
Oh, no.
So this poor 17-year-old kid's or 18-year-old kid's parents get the copy of the story, and they're like, what the? So now there's this huge uproar. Tim Speltz was the GM. He's phoning me. I'm like, Tim, he said it, but I didn't say it on the air. I just mentioned it as a joke because Babcock denied that he said it. But I understand why, right? You don't want, you have to have trust that the people you're talking to, even in the media, if it's some off-the-hand comment that's not on the record, they're not going to write it in the paper. So anyway, I knew he'd be a good NHL coach because he was a great junior coach.
When you see him this year, make sure you ask him who makes him sick on his team.
Awesome.
Probably not happy I told that story, but that's 100. But that was funny.
Hey, Rick, just one last question from me. I want to just players that you absolutely love and to follow and call their games.
Jeff
and
Sharp.
maybe one superstar player you love to watch and call the game on. And maybe one kind of dark horse that you fans out there might not be aware of that you just think is a special player.
There's so many great players, right? Like I had the pleasure of calling Johnny Gaudreau's career until this year, right, from day one, and he was lots of fun. Like he was so creative, and every rush up the ice, something might happen. He's one of those guys that brings you to the edge of your seat just because he could basically materialize scoring chances out of thin air, right? And so that was a lot of fun, and especially that last year when that line was on fire, boy, that was great. So in terms of calling the Flames, he would have been my favorite guy for sure. And sold a lot of tickets and a lot of sweaters in Calgary. I know a lot of fans are disappointed that he left, but there's like Crosby. Anytime even though he's still great, but when I was calling games when they were Stanley Cup winners and he was playing, it's like you could just see obviously the skill level, but his competitive fight was almost a match. Like when you couple that level of ability with that drive, it's unstoppable. Like you think about the great players in the game, they all have to have the skills, but what separates the really good guys from the great guys is the will to win. And Crosby had that in spades, and you could see it manifested with the way he played, right? He was not afraid. He'd go to the dirty areas. He'd drag his own team into the battle when he had to, and he could make magic things happen. So, he might be the favorite player sort of in my era of calling games that Connor McDavid's terrific. It's hard though, because the battle with the Flames and the Oilers, there's no doubt that guy is a world-class talent. I mean, you can't argue. I mean, what he's doing in this era of putting up the kind of points that guys were scoring in the 80s, like it's just ridiculous, right? You just don't do that. Cale Makar, Calgary guy. I called his first game in the NHL. It was the playoffs 3 years ago when the Flames were. He goes to the Final Four. Did they win? I can't remember. Anyway, he plays in the Final Four. He signs a contract. He gets into his first game. It's a playoff game, and he scores a goal. He's really good. Now, last year was a bit tough because he got banged up. But, that guy is, in terms of his ability from the blue line to make things happen offensively, is thrilling to watch for all the same reasons I mentioned Johnny Gaudreau, except he's doing it as a defenseman. So, and he's a Calgary kid. Makes it even better. But there's so many great players, and the skill level's never been higher, guys. You know that. Like we talked about it earlier about how the game has changed. If you don't have skill or can't skate, very difficult to play. And that just underscores how fast and fun the game is to watch.
Love it. Thank you so much, Rick, for dropping by.
Hey,
giving us.
I was thinking about this, Ian, when you guys earlier were talking about Memorial Arena. So I had a notion. You wouldn't know it by this interview, but early when I was like before I got into broadcasting, I had a notion that maybe comedy would be something I could do. I used to record. Remember Friday night or evening at the Improv? They used to have it on NBC on Friday. I used to record on a cassette recorder, the bits, right, and record the show. So I'd MC all the talent contests in high school and do all that stuff, and then I'd just tell the jokes I'd steal all the best jokes from the guys that I heard, and it killed. About 20 comedians and take each one's best joke. You can't lose.
That's hilarious.
So
that's an interesting idea.
So that's so we there was an air band competition. Remember those things?
Yeah.
And it was citywide. So just a blast. Hey, you can't play an instrument or it's like stealing another comedian's jokes. So I emceed the one at my school, and there was a big final competition at Memorial Arena, and I told a bunch of jokes, and the organizer of the whole thing was there, and of course it's all my stone buddies laughing at me, telling Jerry Seinfeld jokes and Rodney Dangerfield's No Respect album, and he goes come to Memorial Arena and do it. It's the city finals. Come and do some comedy. So at this point, I'd never heard comedians talk about the nightmare of opening for a rock act.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was not a seasoned veteran like Ian is, who could fight his way through that shit. I was a high school kid.
You weren't being booed off because of a murder.
So I'm like, oh, this will be great. I figure they're going to throw me on at something when they're tallying the scores, or maybe at the start. No, middle of the show. All right, we just gone from the head pins to Loverboy to an AC/DC, and then let's stop the show. We're an hour into it, and here's Rick to tell some jokes. I come walking out of the stage. I'm not even at the microphone yet. Somebody throws a cardboard box. I don't know, like huge, like refrigerator box. I don't even know where they got it. I haven't even hit the mic. It comes flying up on the stage. So I was supposed to do like 10 minutes. I think I told 4 jokes and just left, and that was the end of my comedy career. Probably a good move.
That's hilarious. A box comes flying at you. You know what?
It wasn't like a box that you bring, buy some oranges in. It was like gigantic.
Some homeless guy threw his house on stage. I was in Kelowna with Bert Kreischer this year, and we did the arena where the Rockets play. And
that's awesome.
Before the show, all I could think was, holy shit, this is Kelowna. They're not good at dealing with stuff, but they were, I was like, this is going to be the worst show ever. But they turned out to be fantastic. Nobody threw a box.
How's Bert, by the way?
Oh, he's fantastic. He's he's
hilarious.
And that movie, you got to see the movie. The movie's hilarious.
The Machine.
Just the fact that Luke Skywalker's his father is just worth going. It's just it's so funny. We went to the opening. Definitely see it. So.
I will.
What next time I'm up in Calgary, we got to get you out to a show, or maybe when you're on the road someplace, get you out to a show.
Yeah.
Have
Jeff send me your digits, and I'll keep in touch. I'd love to do that.
Make sure, and if you go to Vegas, make sure you see Jeffy.
Oh, yeah.
Do you guys see each other when you're there? Have you guys seen each other?
No, no.
Jeff, so you guys had somebody on from Calgary, I forget who, and he said, "Hey, Jeff Sharple said hi," and I go, "Oh, great." He goes, "He'd like to have on the show." So we haven't talked in probably last time I saw you was bumped into you in Kelowna maybe 20 years ago or something.
Yep, that was Mallard.
Yeah.
Mallard, I think, right? One of the last times you
Might
guys
have been,
were in. So I said, "Hey, do you know Rick?" "Oh, Rick, I love Rick." And so it was probably Mallard, but we go way back. It's kind of like, seeing Rick today. It's kind of like we're back at Kelowna Senior Secondary High School, just picking up where we left off, except there's a little water under the bridge since then. But we'll see you for sure twice next year, Rick, and maybe we'll get lucky and see each other in the spring as well, and get the Flames back in the playoffs.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think they'll be better. Any Flames fans watching, I just see everything that could have gone wrong did, and they still just missed the playoffs by a couple points. So my prediction is you'll see them back in next year.
The Pacific's so tough, though. So tough.
It is.
So tough. Anyways, thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure, boys.
Thanks, Rick.
Oh, he's fantastic. I love the fact that he was just in a field
Oh yeah, the best backdrop. We should have had him actually move over. The lake in Kelowna is right behind him. Gyro
Summertime
Beach,
too.
which is actually, I just met my nephew Kalen there.
What, you just met
Last
him?
time I was in Kelowna.
Never met him before?
No, Kalen hasn't met Rick.
No,
What?
you said I just met my nephew.
Oh my dad, yeah, I bet my nephew at a restaurant right across the street there from that beach. We were just there in April, so or May. I don't even know, but yeah, Rick's awesome.
I'm talking over top of you.
Yeah,
Is Kalen living there?
Yeah, he's in Kelowna working now.
Good for him.
Working up at Big White.
Look at that. We just name dropped him 3 times.
Yeah, well, he'll be happy to hear it. So
good for him. And he's a Flames fan, isn't he?
Yeah, so we'll
he'll be all over this.
We'll finish up talking about them, but Rick's just a super guy, always been the same guy, and it shows through in his broadcasting, and he's the guy that chased a dream, and 10 years this year doing the Flames TV, and he's awesome. So
good for him. All right, Jeff. We got the Vegas Knights are up by 2. I don't expect it to be a 4-0 series, but the way it looks right now, you're like, I wouldn't be surprised. But at the same time, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. The Florida team has just got too much pride for that to happen. So, what's your predictions for the next 2 games?
Well, I think you know what I think. Florida, obviously, Thursday is everything, but no matter how good or bad it's gone, you got to wipe the slate clean. And Vegas has got to wipe it clean just like Florida does. Obviously, Vegas is going to be feeling pretty good about themselves. Florida's got to get off to a quick start, and they got to stay disciplined. The other part of this series that's really weighed heavily in Vegas's favor right now is they're very strong 5-on-5, but they've been winning the special teams battle. Their power play has been dormant. It's waking up. 2 goals in both games. So discipline for Florida. And Vegas has killed all the PKs so far. So Florida's got to get their discipline together, get their 5-on-5 game, which hasn't been bad, going a little bit better. And they got to capitalize on their chances, especially when they get some power plays.
Nice. I like
That's
it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it from there. That's it from the report from Vegas. You're like Rick Ball when he was a kid, reporting from your own basketball game.
I know. You know what? I forgot to do live from the rink, and so we could post it after the game. I know. I sat last night with Mallard. We had a blast. We'll get him on next week.
I seen him post, and I was like, I know where these seats are.
Yeah. You know what's crazy is Mallard last night, he's got his phone up. I'm like, what are you doing? Marcia Show gets the puck, goes bar down. He's got it on video. He's filming Marcia score the goal. I was like, holy cow, how'd you know? But that was to make it 1-0, I believe, at the time. But yeah, we had a lot of fun. The place is going crazy. And just like you'd expect. But we'll do our shout outs. I've only name dropped them about 10 times in the show, but I'm going to shout out my nephew, who I've done before on the show. But Kalen, today's for you. Rick Ball, Calgary Flames, diehard Calgary Flames fan. So shout out to my nephew Kalen today.
I want to shout out the Canadian medical system, who I've been trying to work with. My mom is going in for surgery on the 23rd, which is when I am in Irvine. So I'm working it out. So my mom is going to get her heart surgery. Hopefully this will be the time she gets it done. Hopefully she just won't fly down and hang out. Fingers crossed, everybody. Big shout out to the doctors, the pilots, my sister, our friend Judy, who's going to go stay with my father while I am doing the shows, and then I'll go up and see them afterwards. So big shout out to everybody that is helping my mom get better. Boom. Yeah, that was pretty good positivity, right? Positivity.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And let's go, Robin. Come on. And,
let's go, Robin. Oh man, can't even hear you clap. That was weird. Oh.
I don't get these ear pods I got from Apple. They're awesome. So all right, we better get going. Love talk.
All right. Love talk.